Okay, I guess it's being recorded. All right, I'll just give it a few minutes for people to join. Welcome to everyone who is here already. Just give it another minute, wait for people to sign on. All right, I think we can get started. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Andrew Phillips. I'm the founder and executive director of Door County Knock. And also with us tonight are Emily Small, a reporter, and Mariah Goode, who's on the board of the Door County Housing Partnership, among many other experiences in local housing. Um, and we're just going to have a discussion tonight about affordable housing in Door County. Probably cover a decent range of topics. This is building on the series that Door County Knock has been publishing over the past several months about affordable housing called Locked Out, that in particular has focused on roadblocks to building more affordable housing, or sort of the reasons why that this is an issue and why it's difficult to solve. So we'll probably focus somewhat on that angle tonight. Just a bit about why we're here. We have been, as a staff, kind of talking and thinking about ways that we can engage with readers more and offer you a way to engage with us in additional ways. So this is kind of a attempt at that. Just a way for you to meet us and ask questions and engage with a local expert on one of the big issues facing the community. The idea for this Q&A in particular kind of came out of Emily and me talking about some of the stories that we were working on in the housing series and going, there's so much detail and so much nuance to these issues, and it would be really nice if we could kind of convey that to readers in a way that's not always easy to do in a story. And so we thought, well, we've talked with Mariah a lot for this series, and let's just have her on a Zoom and do a Q&A kind of thing. Like I said, we're trying this. We'd love your feedback. We're thinking about maybe doing this quarterly going forward, not always on housing. And Mariah, we won't always bend your arm to do it, but maybe different issues every time. So let us know what you think. You can always email news@doorcountyknock.org, or all of our contact information is on the website. And if you want to support our work, also go to the website, doorcountyknock.org. You can sign up for our email newsletter there, which we send out on Mondays, or make a donation. Just a couple other housekeeping notes before I kick it over to Emily. We are recording this, as Zoom might have told you already. The thought is to put the recording on our website afterwards, so just keep that in mind if you do or don't want your camera or your microphone on, knowing that it's being recorded. And then just a little bit about the format. Emily and Mariah are going to have a discussion first, and then we'll open it up for questions at the end. If you have a question during their discussion, just put your question in the chat, or I think there's a Q&A section in Zoom also. I'll be monitoring both of those, so either one works. And we'll get to those questions at the end. And then when we get to that sort of time for questions at the end, if you want to raise your hand, we can call on you, quote unquote, and you can unmute and turn your camera on if you want. So with that, I will turn it over to Emily.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, everyone who is attending. I appreciate it, and I hope you have some questions or we trigger some questions during the next few minutes here. I want to introduce Mariah a little bit more because to give you some background on why why a housing expert, why we consider her a housing expert, and what she's been involved with knock in this series. So Mariah has a bachelor's degree from Grinnell College in American Studies and Women's Studies. She has a master's degree in municipal planning and nonprofit management from the University of Minnesota. She's was the director of the Door County Land Use Services Department for 18 years and retired in 2024, and was also a planner for 4 years in that department before director. A founding and current board member of the Door County Housing Partnership with Andrew mentioned, and also a member of the Wisconsin Community Land Trust Coalition, Door County Economic Development Corporation's Attainable Housing Committee, and a member of the Technical Advisory Committee to the Workforce Housing Lending Corporation. Did I miss anything there?
I don't know. It's okay.
A lot, a lot of, in fact, just today, Mariah was telling me that she had a long conversation, met with a friend and had a long conversation about housing. I suspect that happens more often than not. Um, she has been an invaluable resource for Knock's series Locked Out, and was one of the first people that we contacted when we were conceptualizing the series, and she helped us troubleshoot some of the structure of the stories and dial in on some questions to ask and other sources and experts to reach out to. We structured our Locked Out series into two parts. So kind of what happened to all the affordable housing in Door County that Door County had, and what is getting in the way of more being built or provided. But the first thing the series did is we answered some very basic questions. And the most basic question is what's affordable? What counts as affordable? The generally accepted federal definition, that's what we used throughout the series, was that 30% of an individual or household's income spent on housing is affordable, 30% or less. So if you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing, it's not affordable. And that is the most basic way to, I think, define it. HUD, the Housing and Urban Development um, Department, federal department, is the one who comes up with that criteria. They also have, they come up with a criteria for income limits for subsidized housing and tax credits and things like that. And they have a formula that they use. And they base their formula on area median income, which is in Door County, that's $103,700 a year. So half of Door County makes more than that, half of Door County makes less than that, is essentially what an area median income is. Um, and it is the key determining factor for most housing program eligibility. If I'm on, that's correct. I mean, that's,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, the formula takes into account, HUD's formula takes into account family size, and for their income limits. And for Door County in 2025, the income limits were based on 80% of the AMI, or $56,000 a year for one person, or $64,550 a year for two people, is an example of 80% AMI in Door County. Does that can you clarify anything there?
I think maybe what's important for people to know is that seemingly most federal programs that are out there where it's an income-based housing related program, whether you're getting, vouchers towards rent or whatever it is, 80% for whatever reason of area median income is often the cap based on your
Mhm.
household size. So those numbers are really important. And that,
Mhm.
like you said, we don't get to generate those.
Right. So let's take a family of four in Door County making 80% of the AMI, would be $80,650 a year.
Right.
The average home price in Door County in 2025 was 424 some thousand dollars. That's according to Zillow. Three-bedroom apartment average rent, which for a family of four, a three-bedroom is probably the reasonable option. And that average rent is $1,800 a month, according to apartments.com and what they have, and over $1,000 a month for a two-bedroom. So if you start doing the math, 80% AMI is spending more than 30% of their income, or coming very close, right around that.
They're probably spending more. I mean, part of so everybody in the country uses that housing and urban development
AMI definition in those numbers for most programs. And that definition was derived in like the 1960s, and
Hmm.
it doesn't take into consideration any debt that people have, whether you've got student loan debt or car debt or credit card debt or anything like that. And there are a lot of people that work in the housing realm that think that it should be that 30% of your income after you take the debt out of the equation is what's considered affordable, but that's not how, like banks and all these other programs do that. So and I think nationally, there's a huge percentage of people that are spending way more than 30% of their income on their housing, because it's also supposed to include all of your utilities and everything else, not just
Right.
mortgage
Not
or,
just mortgage and rent, right?
yeah.
That's a good point about the debt. Then one of the definitions too is workforce, because we hear that a lot here. Well, even across the state, a lot of legislation focuses on workforce and workforce housing. So we wanted to how we were going to use that in this series was workforce households are generally considered to be the middle income households. So households making between 60 and 120% of that AMI. They often earn too much for affordable housing programs, but then so they can fall somewhere in that workforce definition. These are people like teachers, healthcare workers, civil servants, shop clerks, other essential workers. So they're making enough money, quote unquote, to afford market rate housing, maybe, but it might not necessarily be adequate what they can afford for the number of people in their household and that kind of thing. So we have to take workforce into account as well.
Right.
Um,
And they're probably not even making adequate funds most of the time for whatever housing is out there. So, like the Door County Housing Partnership, the one board that I'm on that you mentioned,
yeah.
we purposefully go even over above 120% area median income as far as our eligibility, just to try and fill that gap. Because, yeah, I mean, even if you're making $100,000, you can't buy a median priced home
Hmm.
at that $400,000 mark.
That leads me to Alice. We'll talk a little bit about Alice and what that acronym means and how that population maybe falls into things. So Alice, if you don't know, is an acronym for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. Um, you had noted, Mariah, that the numbers show that a quarter of the county is living either in poverty or in the Alice category. And that category is households that earn more than federal poverty level, but less than the basic cost of living in their community. So they're the households that are one paycheck away from destitution or living literally living paycheck to paycheck would
Right.
be a
And
good way.
that the Alice study is done every other year. That's actually a national United Way thing. And Wisconsin is one of the states. I think there's maybe like a dozen or more states where they do the Alice studies every other year to look at those numbers. And that actually is a much better look when you go, if you go onto United Way's website and look at some of the materials. That takes into account far more than like the HUD definition does in terms of trying to figure out like what kinds of expenses families actually have to pay for. Like it looks at childcare, it looks at transportation, it looks at technology, because everybody has to have, phones and computers and everything else, internet these days. So those numbers are pretty frightening, that I think a quarter of the county is either, like you said, one paycheck away or in poverty in Door County.
Mhm. They have a interactive um what it's an interactive I did it and it was very eye-opening where you kind of put yourself in that position, answer questions and try to figure out how you're going to make your money go where it
Yeah.
needs to go. And it is effective. Let's put it that way to make you sort of understand how some people and lots of people in the county are trying to make it all work. It gives you a good picture of that. So one of the things was beyond definitions, one of the things we did want to address right away in the series was how big is the need for affordable housing? And we relied heavily on the 2019 housing study, which was commissioned by the Door County Economic Development Corporation, various municipalities, the county, and some area businesses. It was tricky to count on that and use that because we were doing this series 2025 somewhat of 2024, 2025. And most of the data in that study was from 2017. So it didn't take into account COVID and its effects on the market and housing, which is huge. I had someone tell me, I can't remember who, in the course of my reporting, that the numbers were basically useless, which is after because of COVID's impact on things. So
I mean, yeah, I think the numbers are probably useful in terms of the number of units that the study thought we were
yeah,
short in the county. So it was like they thought as of 20 end of 2017, based on the data they were using, that the county was already short like 500 apartments, and I think it was maybe like 150 affordable homes or whatever. What was useless about it, I think, were the dollar amounts that they ended up looking at, because the housing market in Door County, as far as prices, literally doubled between 2020 and I think last year. Because
yeah,
I think the area median um, home sales, if you took waterfront and water view out in 2019, was like 250,000. Actually, no, it was like 225, I think. So yeah, and
yeah.
our incomes have not doubled
No,
in the 5 years.
no. Um, so while we use that, we also used Sister Bay did a housing study more recently, focused on on Sister Bay, but that was helpful for getting some metrics and some measurements. And we were this is pretty recent news. Door County Economic Development Corporation they're working on another housing study and just put out a request for proposals for the new study. So that new one should be a better, more comprehensive and accurate picture, and we'll be looking forward to that. Um, but what is your take on the need, what it is and what it was? I know you probably have a good finger on that pulse.
I mean, I think the needs only gotten probably worse since that study. It'll be interesting to see what they come up if they try and quantify the number of units again that are needed in each area. I think that's the hope, is that they'll be able to do that. I mean, there have been literally hundreds of apartments and obviously homes built since that study came out. So, since 2019, there have been hundreds of new units that have been built, especially in the city of Sturgeon Bay for like rental units, and then a lot in Sister Bay also. But as far as whether or not they're affordable, there have not been that many units that have been built that have been officially designated as affordable. So there's, the project in Sister Bay near the daycare, the Shoals, that one is officially federally affordable units. There's a couple more applications with that same program, the low income housing tax credit program, that are hopefully in the works in Sturgeon Bay. There are other homes and apartments that are being built in Sturgeon Bay and Sister Bay that are deemed as workforce housing, but they're a relatively, like, some of the homes are selling more at like the $300,000 mark, which, if you've got two people that are working year round, that maybe is doable. But yeah, depending on what you make, you may or may not think that what's being built is actually affordable.
I see that comment um, on social media a lot is in response to
Mhm.
things that are being built. Well, it's not affordable. Affordable for who? That kind of thing. Then hopefully we can get to some discussion on that also. So we know housing affordability and availability has been an issue in Door County for a long time. Community health assessment just came out. That's something the public health department and the hospital each need to do, and they collaborated this year. Um, the one in 2023 and then the one that came out this year both identified safe and affordable housing as a top priority. Over 900 people actually responded to the survey and the assessment this year, a huge jump from respondents before, and 45.7% of those respondents indicated it was their number one concern. So there's no argument there, but let's start with the positives. Since the 2019 housing survey, what has been accomplished? What's moving in a positive direction as far as housing in the county?
Well, we did get that low income housing tax credit project, the Shoals in Sister Bay, and that was the first set of new affordable housing units in the county in Northern Door for 20 years, I think, at least. So that's good. And those, when we talk about low income housing tax credit programs, that's a federal program that funnels through the Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority. And those units have to be affordable for 30 years. So that's a nice asset to the community. So that project has happened. The Door County Housing Partnership which is I'm on the board of that. We focus on affordable home ownership opportunities for year-round workforce families. We just closed on our 8th home last week, so that's good. And I think we have about 10 more lots left, split between Sturgeon Bay and Sister Bay. So we're making slow progress there. There's also the Workforce Housing Lending Corporation has been established since that study. That's a combined effort of the Door County Community Foundation and NeighborWorks Green Bay. They set up this separate third nonprofit that at the moment has one program area, which includes a matching loan, 0 interest, 30-year from Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority to match with local dollars. And the fund is to be used for loans to developers of affordable units, rental units. So that one project is almost done. And there's, I think, at least 2 more that are in the application process and maybe 1 or 2 others that are out there that are interested after that. So we're starting to make some headway on affordable rental units as well. And that the Workforce Housing Lending Corporation is intended to be, there's a cap on how much each developer can borrow from that program. It's intended to be just a piece of the puzzle and to try and incentivize developers to maybe build housing here instead of in other areas of the state where they might be able to charge more in rents. So we're providing a lower interest rate for those loans than the typical bank would. What else? Habitat has, I think they hit their 50th home this last year. So they've been doing typically more than one in the last couple of years. And the Door County Housing Partnership and Habitat have set up a great collaboration. We've combined efforts on a couple of different builds in a couple of different ways. And so that's been really good. What else? There have been hundreds of new market rate apartments that have been built, like I said earlier, in both Sister Bay and Sturgeon Bay. There is some school of thought out there that part of the solution to the housing problem is to just keep building more and more and more because maybe eventually things will settle out. I don't personally think that that actually works in Door County because I think there's too many people that are going to snap up either new or even rental units as second homes or, you know, retirement homes as opposed to workforce actually being able to get them. But yeah, there has been a lot of housing built, I guess, in the last 5 or 6 years.
Okay. Um, there are, you talked about this. There's several housing organizations and committees in the county. It's easy to become confused by what each one does. I know you ran through a couple of them just now, but would you be able to provide a kind of in a nutshell description of all the different?
I made a list. I've got a cheat sheet over here on the
Yeah.
side. So, I mean, obviously, Habitat, I think most people are probably familiar with Habitat for Humanity. It serves generally very low income people who are unable to get a mortgage. They help build the home. So, Habitat, like I said, has now finished their 50th house. They've partnered with Door County Housing Partnership, the other nonprofit that I was talking about, on, I think, 5 houses so far now, which works out really well with Habitat because usually after their buyer buys the house, after a certain amount of time, the buyer can then sell the house on the open market. But when they work with Door County Housing Partnership, those are income restricted for every owner and restricted as far as what they're going to sell at. So the Door County Housing Partnership works on what's called a community land trust model of affordable home ownership. And that basically means we're subsidizing the purchase for that first household. And then they're earning equity on what they pay, not on what the market value is. And then the next buyer buys it based on the equity that that first family has made. So the housing partnership, you'll hear people talk about community land trust, Workforce Housing Lending Corporation, which I already touched on a little bit. That's the revolving loan fund for affordable rental units. Door County Economic Development Corporation doesn't run housing programs per se, but they've had an attainable housing committee since like the late 90s. And so that group convenes every other month. And it's pretty much any organization or municipality that's interested in affordable housing gets together to just share information and make sure we all know what everybody's doing and what programs and things are out there to combine forces on things. And then like we put together the request for proposals for the housing study. There's the Door County Housing Authority. So there's a federal program that people call Section 8 usually because that's the name of the federal code that relates to housing rent vouchers for people. So there's a number of landlords that will take those in the county and that helps subsidize lower income rents. NeighborWorks Green Bay, their territory actually includes most of the state, not just Door County, and they're becoming more and more active in Door County. Door County Housing Partnership partners with them. They're part of the Workforce Housing Lending Corporation. There's Partners for Community Development, which runs what I think used to be called I forget what it is now, the energy efficiency and rehabilitation, home rehabilitation programs. And then there's been other committees between like Sister Bay and at one point Bailey's Harbor had a housing committee. I think there's a lot of other groups out there that are meeting. I think Liberty Grove had a housing committee. So it feels like, I think to the outside people, because I get asked this a lot, like, why are there so many of you or why is there so much stuff going on? But there really is a lot of coordination, even if it may not look like it or it may seem like there's too many cooks in the kitchen, but it is, I think everybody's pretty well aware of what everybody's doing and we're not duplicating efforts too much.
Yeah, and one of the conclusions I drew from reporting on housing the last year was that this problem only really will be solved with collaboration. Um, and that everyone does talk to each other, that it isn't super siloed. This place is doing this group is doing this, that there is quite a bit of collaboration, and the really successful things have been come out of that collaboration and those communications. So,
Yeah, I think that's true.
okay.
And I think it's definitely also true that this is not, well, if this problem were going to solve itself, it would be solving itself. So if market forces were going to build affordable housing and have enough affordable housing, then we'd have enough affordable housing. So clearly that's not happening. And it used to be that, maybe 20, 25 years ago, or maybe even 10 or 15 years ago, all you needed to do in order to get a developer to be able to build an affordable project would be for a municipality to maybe give them the land to put the project on. Now, Geneva Ridge in Sturgeon Bay, which is a great project, it's 24 homes, and I think they're going to do another subdivision right next to it. The city's putting in the infrastructure, so they're basically, and it's more complicated than I'm going to make it right now, but the gist of it is that land, sewer, water, the platting, the roads, the stormwater, that's all being handled on the public side in order for the private builder, to be able to sell these homes at something that's even, possibly remotely affordable to workforce households. It's just not, the math just doesn't work for the market to handle it.
That kind of Geneva Ridge, not so much, but some of that leading back to what it really is affordable and what are people's perceptions of affordability. So when you see those social media comments or you talk to folks and people say that affordable housing isn't actually affordable, other than Marissa Down's project, The Shoals in Sister Bay, and a few others, you said none of them are actually claiming to be affordable. But I think it's hard that people don't necessarily always understand that or see it that way. And maybe you could talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I mean, I think, a developer or a municipality, they might say, this is affordable housing or this is workforce housing. And maybe it is, like, maybe there's people that are in the workforce that are able to rent or buy at whatever price point is for that particular project, but it might not be like maybe what the bulk of the workforce in that area feels is affordable to them. And a lot of times those projects, even though, there are a lot of great projects out there along those lines, they're not technically, not Geneva Ridge because they're using local dollars, but if they're not getting something that is constraining the rent or the sale price that those units are going for, then maybe they're going to be affordable to that first household, but they might not be affordable to anybody after that. And there's nothing, the market's going to eventually take over and they're going to either sell or rent for what they're going to sell or rent for. So, and I think Door County incomes, we have relatively low incomes compared to the rest of the state, and the state of Wisconsin, I believe, has historically had relatively low incomes compared to the rest of the country. But again, it's not that much cheaper. Well, it's actually not cheaper to build anything here. We're a peninsula, like we're not on the way anywhere, so materials are coming in one direction. So that combined with, if the construction costs are the same or higher than other areas, it's really mathematically impossible for someone to actually build affordable housing without a lot of assistance, either for the developer or for the people that are going to rent or buy it. and like we already talked about, the area median income definitions that we don't get to set include everybody in the community, not just the workforce. So
Mhm.
what the workforce might make in income compared to what, once you add potentially higher income retirees and whoever else in the community has got unearned income, that can skew like what can be charged for rents and still meet that federal definition. So it's all really complicated and confusing, and a lot of it probably may not be affordable to local.
Mhm. Mm. What would you qualify as the main factors contributing to a lack of housing in Door County? I hear short-term rentals are blamed a lot. Tourism, is it seasonal housing, market increased, cost of development, zoning
Yeah, I mean,
limitations?
I don't. I think the short-term rental or the tourist rooming house, which is what the state calls them, that's part of the fact that we have, especially in Northern Door, really tourism and dominant economy, which affects obviously the housing market. So that is a huge factor in Door County. So we're a peninsula, which is a problem in and of itself. We've got a seasonal and tourism dominant economy, and people who are coming from areas where the housing costs are way worse than they are here, where we look affordable to them for their second home or whatever. And so that just kind of exacerbates the problem for locals. And I've got lots of real estate friends, and they talk about people showing up at high-end closings with cash for the house. And so you've got locals that are trying to compete with not even just high-end closings, but locals that are trying to compete for housing where they need to get financing. And oftentimes the seller would rather just sell it to somebody that is going to write them a check. And so I think it's a mixture of the tourism economy, which short-term rentals are not a large, but a small part of, the geography. We don't have very much infrastructure in Door County. So Sister Bay and Sturgeon Bay are the only places in the county that have sewer and water, which makes it a lot cheaper to develop in those places. I mean, it's not cheap, but it's cheaper to develop in those places. And so that's why you see most of the apartments and higher density stuff happening in those two areas. And then we have Wisconsin, the state level has set up a lot of legislation in the last, like, I'd say 10, 15 years that precludes the use of things that are used in other parts of the country to allow for more affordable housing development. So it's really like probably almost everything that you can think of is a factor.
Multi-pronged
Yeah.
issue. Um, we talk a little bit about the WIDA pilot project and funding. WIDA is what am I, Wisconsin
Wisconsin Housing Economic, wait, Wisconsin Housing and Economic
Economic
Development
Development
Authority.
Authority, right? Okay. So many acronyms. But WIDA, you hear about WIDA a lot. And I actually interviewed the director of WIDA in December. It was a great conversation. It's reflected in one of the stories we did, one of the last ones. And that was something he focused on and really wanted to talk about a lot was that pilot project and the funding from that.
So WIDA is the entity that runs that low-income housing tax credit program that I was talking about, which is federal dollars. So that's what helped with the Shoals and Sister Bay, where you've got units that are affordable for 30 years. They decided, well, I don't know when they decided, but they decided to do a pilot that ran from 2020 to 2021 in Door County, called the Rural Affordable Workforce Housing Initiative or something like that. And basically they wanted the community to come up with like what would be helpful to try and address housing issues in this area. And we came up with like four different things, two of which they decided to fund. And one of those is the Workforce Housing Lending Corporation. So that's the
Oh.
entity that I talked about that does the revolving loan fund for, in this case so far, developers of affordable rental units.
Mhm.
Um, the other areas that got fund, or that I don't know whether they've gotten funding, but that were part of that project were Marinette and then the Ashland and Bayfield County area. So there were three areas in Wisconsin that were part of that pilot. I'm not sure what kind of programs WIDA is rolling out based on that pilot. I mean, we're those of us that are still involved, and I'm only really tangentially involved now in the Workforce Housing Lending Corporation. I don't know. We're hoping that after 30 years, when the loan is due back to WIDA, that we can just get another 30-year loan and that we won't actually have to pay it back. But I don't know if they're starting to do things like that in other areas. WIDA did it last year, I believe. Developed like 4 new program areas. So there's like a Main Street program where you can get WIDA funding for redeveloping housing above businesses. So that's actually one of the projects the Workforce Housing Lending Corporation helped fund, was above Cherry Lanes in Sturgeon Bay. And they also got one of those WIDA, I can't remember if it's a grant or a loan. I think it's a loan. And then there's like 3 others. And the good news is that they're starting to broaden what they used to fund. So when we did the pilot project with WIDA, what we kept coming back to, it was infrastructure, that we really needed money to try and address infrastructure. And at the time in 2020, 2021, we just said, we don't fund infrastructure. Now they actually have a program that is for funding infrastructure. I think they're kind of regrouping at the state level because they put aside a fairly large chunk of money for those 4 programs, but then hardly any of the money went out the door because I've heard that the red tape and whatever else is just crazy. So I think they're trying to actually figure out how to better get that money out the door. But so hopefully that'll free up something, we'll be able to use things like that. Because like I know Sister Bay would like to look at workforce housing next to the rec park with the property that they've bought there, but that has no infrastructure. Even though it's right next to the wastewater treatment plant, it's going to cost like a lot of money to put the infrastructure in there. So maybe there'll be money out there in the next handful of years that we can start tapping into.
Yeah, they let me know that they were looking at some of the requirements a little more carefully and making a little more room for nuance in rural areas versus urban areas. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
Yeah, I mean that's another issue. And Marissa Downs, like we've already mentioned her a couple of times from the Shoals, could talk about that a little bit more, because one of the reasons that the Shoals was the first low-income housing tax credit project in Northern Dorian forever is that all the applicants across the state for these apartments are in this, they used to be, I don't know if this is still true, in the same pool applying for the same pot of money. And part of how you get scored is how close are you to a hospital, and what's public transportation like. And although we have Dortran and everything else, it's not like having a bus system that's running every 15 minutes for you to the pharmacy. I can't remember what all the things are, so it's hard to score well in Door County outside of Sturgeon Bay.
It's something that they're looking at. So I don't know if any movement on that, but that nuance, it's in, like you said, smoothing things out and um trying to make sense, to make room for the nuances, but still be equitable and get money out fairly is something that lots of, or I think that WIDA struggles with, maybe. I don't know if I'm speaking for them, but
Yeah.
and then one final question, then we'll open up for questions from participants. One part of our Locked Out series focused on paradigm shift, and that a paradigm shift is needed. A change in public mindset regarding housing needs to happen. Can you speak to that? What are maybe some attitudes that limit what can be done, or historically have limited what can be done?
Well, I mean, I've been involved in affordable housing stuff up here for over 25 years. And I would say until probably that 2019 housing study came out, those first 19, 20 years, a lot of what those of us that were involved in housing initiatives up here, a lot of what we spent our time doing was trying to convince people that there was a problem, because a lot of people just did really not understand or think there was a problem. Well, my daughter was able to find a house, or they just built these new apartments or whatever. Now I don't think I've run across anybody in the last 5 years that doesn't think that there's an affordable housing problem up here, whether you're talking about rental or home purchase or anything. So I think we've gotten past that, and that's some good progress. I think the next hurdle is what we were talking about a little bit before, which is it's not enough now to just give a developer or sell a developer land for $1 for them to be able to do affordable housing. It's just not going to work. So we have to figure out how to how to make, I mean, the developers aren't necessarily being greedy. They want to make money. That's their business. And so we need to
Mhm.
figure out how to have them be able to make enough profit that they're going to build housing up here. But then I think also figure out ways to have that housing stay affordable, because I mean, it's so expensive now to build anything up here or anywhere. And so you're putting all this money into projects. And so, the low income housing tax credit projects are affordable for 30 years. They can reapply after 30 years. So obviously the hope is that a lot of those, once those are timing out, they'll reapply again and get refunded. But if they don't, then those are going to become market rate apartments. Or, if a municipality puts a bunch of money into a project and whatever restrictions are in place maybe only apply to the first buyers, well, those are eventually going to go on the market, and maybe they become second homes, or short-term rentals or whatever, depending on what's set up. I mean, I think Sister Bay and Sturgeon Bay are being really pretty good and forward thinking as far as what they're doing, and are trying to put restrictions on housing. And I think that's going to be what really needs to happen next. That we just a lot of money and time and thought needs to go into it, both at the municipal and the private level, I think. And then I know everyone thinks that like zoning is a huge issue, and maybe I'm a little touchy on the subject because I worked for the county zoning for over 20 years. But part of that 2019 study actually looked at our county zoning ordinance at that point, and they were like, actually, your ordinance is fine. We don't see anything in here that we would change that we think is really a significant obstacle. It's not what's causing the cost of housing to be high in the county. It's, building codes cause things to be really expensive. And yeah, so I don't think that zoning is as big of an issue. There may not be enough land zoned for maybe multifamily housing, but I think the codes themselves are not always the problem. And then of course there are always people that don't want to have affordable housing next to them too. So depending on what it looks like, that could be an issue.
Yeah. Um, we want to save some time. We've got some good chunk of time left here for anybody's questions. If anybody on the Zoom has a question or something to bring up or a story to share, that's fine too. We'll open it up. You raise your hand, and looks like Alexandra.
Okay. I
Hello.
wasn't sure if you're able to hear me. Hi, how is everyone doing?
Good.
Good.
Thanks.
Thank you for sharing all your ideas and your expertise. And thank you for having us tonight. I'm just going to try to keep it very simple. I've been in Door County for almost 15 years. I'm a single mom. And thankfully, financially, I would say I'm I guess fortunate position. Um, when it comes to not having any debt whatsoever, no car payments, no student loans. And even with that in mind, it's still a struggle. I love Door County. I made it my home. And I've been on my own for the last 15 years. I have a daughter. I don't get any financial support from anywhere. And I'm very, um, I guess, wise when it comes to finances. I work in the financial industry. I've done financial coaching, and I budget extensively. But I just wanted to share that from a personal point of view, it's very sad to see that we don't have options. I've worked even 5 jobs when I moved in Door County. I worked, multiple jobs throughout the years and just to reach my goals. But it seems like it's harder and harder to do so. I feel like I'm running harder and faster to get somewhere, but it's further away. And it doesn't seem like there's a solution. Yes, there's projects. There's been the shoals which I applied for and it didn't work out. I tried to look at other options. There's really nothing there that would keep it simple. Where my first home, it's a future investment. It's an investment for my retirement. Even if I were to go through any of the programs that Mariah mentioned, I just don't feel that they would be a good outcome for, again, my retirement, because maybe I don't own the land and it's leased for, certain years, or if I decide to sell the home that I would purchase is not going to be sold for a profit to help me, to just enjoy the fruits of the labor that I put through all the years of work. So, I don't know what the answer is at this time with, what can we do? Yes, developers are trying to make money as well as their business. I definitely understand. And we're in a tough spot, I guess, because it's a peninsula and we can't build on water, right? It's just that much room that we have. Um, but I just I don't know where to head because I can't even move. I have a daughter that goes to school at Gibraltar. Um, my my place is there for the foreseeable future. I'll have to be there. I don't have a choice to move. I can even move to Sturgeon Bay to maybe purchase a home there, which at times I look at Zillow and I'm like, oh, maybe I can do this, 260,000. Maybe I can find something there. I have, some money put aside for a down payment, which again, other areas I'll be perfectly fine. But Door County, where I need to be and I have to be, it's not an option. So,
Yeah.
um,
I think so a couple of things, and I'm glad you said where you live because you're in Northern Door. So I would encourage you to call the Door County Housing Partnership. So that's the board that I'm on, where we do retain ownership of the land, and the buyer just buys the home, and you earn equity on your home. But it's not true that you're not going to make any money off of it. We've not been around long enough for anybody to actually sell any of their homes yet that we've built. But in other community land trusts across the country, people do phase out of that housing and find themselves able to buy homes on the market. And with how we have our thing, with our program set up, we can actually show you exactly how much money you would make if you sold the home after 5, 10, or 15 years. And you can leave it to your heirs also. So I would encourage you to look into that if you haven't. It sounds like you're really savvy as far as the finance end of everything, because I was going to suggest, if you haven't already talked to banks, and don't just talk to one bank or where you work, like make sure you
right.
ask about what programs are out there. Because I found that when I bought a house, I just assumed, this was 30 years ago, I assumed the bank was going to tell me like, oh, you qualify for this WIDA first time home buyer program. Well, nobody told me, and I didn't even know what WIDA was at
No.
that point. And a year later, I found out about WIDA, and I was like, how come my bank didn't tell me this? Like, I totally would have qualified for this low interest, whatever. So I think, but you're right that a lot of it is word of mouth and who knows whom. And like, yeah, you might find out about something that's selling before it goes on the market. That seems to be a common story in Door County.
Right.
Um,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
and there
I've heard that
is,
quite a bit.
yeah, I mean, and I think, yeah, your story, unfortunately, your story is not uncommon. And I think we're so far behind at this point that I don't want people to throw up their hands in despair, but we really need to get moving on this, because it is going to take, I think, a long time before we get to a point where we feel like we have enough homes in the housing partnership portfolio, or we have enough, low income housing tax credit apartments, or whatever it is. But yeah, until then, I get it. It's a struggle. We are trying to, like I said, that Economic Development Corporation, all the entities that meet every other month and coordinate, and so that we're trying to coordinate programs. But there's also some movement underfoot to try and have some sort of centralized information about what's out there for rent and what are the prices and who has availability, and what is out there that's able to be developed, so that if a developer calls whatever entity in the county and says, I want to build something, that there'd be a place to point them to. And that project is going to, I think, kind of take off in the next year or so. But yeah, it's not going to be quick, unfortunately, to
Well,
help.
and Alexandra, you touched on a really important thing, um, an issue, I think, that homes and an equity, building equity as an investment and as having a financial legacy, as having um, your nest egg in a very literal sense, um, is is even trickier now than it ever was. There's an interesting project in Colorado where renters are actually building equity. I believe it's the state pays into that. I
Mhm.
was,
I've heard of that. Yes.
yeah, I don't know. This might go to what's possible in Wisconsin, what's not. But I that just came to my attention, and I was wanting to do some kind of solution story about that. Do you have any familiarity with if Mariah?
Not with that. There are a lot of really cool things happening in Colorado, and a lot of them you can't do here. I don't know about that one. I think you could probably do some kind of rent equity thing. One thing that, and now I'm putting on my Door County Housing Partnership hat, which is the community land trust model of affordable home ownership. Because when we first started, people were like, well, why would anybody want to buy one of those houses where their equity is restricted? And the thing is, like, you're not going to buy one of the Door County Housing Partnership homes if you can afford a home on the market. I mean, that's the point. Like, you're either renting and you're getting no equity, or you're going to buy a home where you're going to get equity, but it's going to be based on what you pay for it. So you're still going to be getting something. You're still going to be better off than whether you're renting or not. And our homes are also, like, you're saving a lot of money in taxes. So compared to what you would pay for even this comparably priced home, it's financially it's better than renting, I guess, financially, but I'm not familiar with that Colorado program. I know Green Bay is also forming a community land trust, and they're looking at taking some existing rental housing that's out there in one program area, of a nonprofit, not of the city, and potentially seeing whether or not those renters can buy those units and have those become part of the community land trust. And that's, I think, a really cool idea. But I don't think there's a nonprofit up here that owns a lot of apartments to do that with.
Alexandra, did you have other questions or thoughts?
Well, and Alexandra, if you
think
want to email or call me, I could talk to you more about the housing
Okay.
market too.
Sure. And I think I joined the Sister Bay town meetings at some point when that was brought up as well. I just feel like there's nothing straightforward. At this point, again, I just don't feel we have a solution. We're in a tough spot. A lot of families struggle. Yes, and I mentioned in my Q&A section there that it's our responsibility as potential buyers to be financially aware. Meaning, and I'm pretty straightforward, and it might sound like I'm, just I would call it tough love, but when, we have to prioritize what's important. Am I looking for a home and I'm struggling? Okay, let's look at my expenses. Let's see where I'm at with this. Am I being reasonable and I can afford it? Am I ready to purchase? And Emily and Mariah both brought up, 30%, the most from should be, housing expense, right? Rent or mortgage, 25 to 30%, with 25 being ideal from, my experience, but it's very hard. But I think it's a community effort, is every party's involvement effort that comes into play. I want a house, but I have to be realistic. Can I afford it? And I'm ready to purchase. Because even if the bank would give me a loan, am I going to be house poor down the road because they gave me the loan, but now I can't afford it? Right? And that the expenses are too high. And then we have to think about repairs and the fact that we're responsible once we purchase a home for everything that comes with it. It's not just paying the mortgage and we're good to go. Mm-hmm. And of course, the fact that we can't purchase anything right now in Door County, that's difficult. So I'm hoping, I'm staying, hopeful, and maybe something will happen, and I'll keep looking. But yeah, I'll definitely touch base with you, Mariah, and I would like to hear more. Yeah.
Thank you. We've got a couple other hands up, and I don't know who raised first, so I'll just go with in order on the list. Laura, if you can. Hi.
Hi, Terry and Laura here.
Okay, hi.
Hi, question for you. How does the Alice slash low income, according to HUD, compare in Door County relative to Kewaunee County, Brown County, et cetera? We said 25% are living below this. How is it in the other communities that we're adjacent to?
That's a good question.
I don't actually know the Alice numbers for the surrounding counties. I'd suggest that if you go on the Door County United Way website and look at their Alice materials, maybe they have links to either the, I know that when you look at the Door County numbers, you can look at the state numbers. But I think those Alice studies are by county. So I think there should be information.
Well, I guess
maybe at the National United Way level, but I think
I mean,
Yeah.
you brought up the numbers, so it sounds significant, but I don't know what it is relative to other places, Milwaukee County or
Yeah.
Cook County in Chicagoland, et cetera.
Right.
How
I mean,
many
I think, oh, go ahead.
how many people are on our Zoom call tonight? Do you know what your audience is? How many people are listening in?
We've got about 14, 15 people right now.
Well, the
Yeah.
reason I ask is because, obviously this is important to the three of you, and it's obviously important to Laura and I. That's, why we spent the time tonight. But if you only have an audience of 14 or 15 people, I'm wondering how important it is, because I know you did advertise this through email, et cetera.
Mhm.
And what is the goal? It's nice to have everybody to have a home. Of course, we're a very generous society, but Door County wasn't historically, we're not a manufacturing hub. We are tourism and agriculture. And
Actually, yeah, a third of the economy is manufacturing.
No, yeah.
so, okay. So
Yeah.
we also have a population of what, 26 or 28,000 people. What are
30,000.
the economic consequences? Are people having to, we're involved in a restaurant. Are people having to drive from south of Sturgeon Bay in order to get to their places where they work? Is that one of the
Yes.
consequences?
Yeah. And people are commuting from Green Bay to work at Gibraltar schools. Like, so the consequences are that businesses, nonprofits, municipalities are not finding workers, or people like the woman who just had the question, Alexandra. She sounds like she's bent on staying here, but I can't even tell you how many people I've talked to that have moved because they couldn't find some place to live, or that don't come here at all. So it's a pretty significant economic impact to the county.
How do the people that are local now that, do we have any polls on the sentiment of the population that currently lives in Door County? Is there a reason that, there isn't more affordable? Is it possible that the people that are there are not sensitive to it? Is that a possibility?
Well, no. Well, I guess maybe I'm not understanding your question. I don't know that there's polls per se, but like in the studies that have been done, historically about affordable housing, they've all concluded like we don't have a healthy apartment rental vacancy rate, for example, is considered to be, I think, 5 to 7%. We've never been higher than 2 in the last like 20 some years. And when you contact landlords, they don't even keep wait lists because when somebody's moving out, usually there's like they know 3 people that want to move into that unit. And I think realtors could tell you, they struggle to find anything for locals to buy. Um, so yeah, I don't know that there's been like surveys about sentiment, but I think I would say that maybe I'm just not that big of a draw, and that might be why there's only 14 people on this call, because people are sick of listening to me talk about housing, or they've heard me talk about housing constantly for the last 25 years. But I don't think that's any indication of the size of the problem. I know that like Door County does typically look worse on paper as far as incomes and everything else compared to the rest of the state, and definitely compared to Green Bay. Like I just heard a stat last week that the average rent in Green Bay is, I think it was $1,100 a month. And in Door County, it's almost $1,500 a month, but our incomes are lower than in the Green Bay area. So that's why you have teachers at, for example, Gibraltar School that are living in Green Bay and driving up here every day.
Yeah. I
Well,
did.
it's about, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I just Terry, to answer your part of your original question. I just while we were talking, I looked up the Alice data for Brown and Kewaunee County. Um, so Door County, it's 24% of the population is considered Alice, which is technically above the poverty line, but still struggling to make ends meet, as Emily and Mariah were explaining earlier. An additional 9% is at or below the poverty line, so 33%, 34% total. In Kewaunee County, that is 31%, so a little bit lower, and then in Brown County, it's 32%. So the 3 counties are similar, but Door County is the highest among the 3.
Thank you.
We definitely have the higher housing prices than those 2.
So it's really, in watching the national news, it seems to me that this, they like to use the word affordability. It's really a national issue. It's not specific to Wisconsin or Door County. It's everywhere. And I think there's a lot of people that are looking at this and seeing what we can do. I don't think there's, we have some property in Colorado, and it's, to build something small but new, in order to make 5% profit on it, they're looking at homes that on average are $550,000. And that's certainly not, people that are making less than $100,000 a year can't, there's just no way. This is going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a national problem. And Door County, I mean, what's unique about Door County, not entirely unique because obviously there's other tourist areas, but yeah, so places in Colorado are very similar to us. Like they're geographically hard to get to because there's one way in or out of the mountains, and we're a peninsula. So I think the seasonal and the tourism economy part is what makes it worse here for locals, but it definitely isn't. Housing generally is a national, probably international problem.
That's what I saw too is in reporting on this and talking to people from other states and other places. It is a national problem, but every community has their own nuances that contribute a little more or a little less, and so it's not something you can put a sort of come up with a national or like a big solution to. It's going to take these community specific ways of addressing things like a resort economy or a tourism economy, that kind of thing.
Well, I think it's great that everybody's, I appreciate all three of you tonight making this possible for us. I just, I don't think, unfortunately, I personally can't come up with a great solution. I wish we had something simple, but I think this is, again, it's probably an international world. It's a global issue, and it's a question of, what do we do as a society? But it's similar in education, education advantages and disadvantages, and healthcare and everything else. I think that's just a part of the human condition.
And I think from my perspective, well, if I had a magic wand, there's a bunch of stuff I would change at the state level that are tools that we just can't even use in Wisconsin. And I think there's not going to be a solution, or like Emily was saying, there's not going to be like, here's the list of things you need to do, and this is going to fix your housing problem across the country. It is going to be potentially different or varied from area to area. And it's like, we need multifamily housing, we need single family housing, we need rental, we need stuff for people to purchase, we need things for seniors, we need things for J1s, so that's another reason why there's so many organizations and programs out there, because it's so multifaceted. There's just not going to be like one agency or one entity that's going to be able to tackle all the angles of it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
And we've got Nikki with your hand's been raised for a bit.
Nikki Voigt, I know you.
Hello.
Hey, Nikki. Oh, now Nikki, you just muted yourself.
Uh-oh.
She was unmuted for a second.
Yeah.
Hear me now? Can
yes,
now we can hear you.
There we go.
There. Okay, so I don't know, too many buttons. I should be techie required before I enter these meetings. And I didn't know what this conversation would necessarily entail tonight. And I always have my if money was not an option hat on, what would I do? And I know you guys are all out here helping to solve the problem. And thank you and for bringing awareness. And to Tim's point, it is Ash Wednesday, right, for Catholics. So it's also just Wednesday in general, right? People get a break from sports, and I'm home. And school board meetings. I was at the draft meeting for the county parks and open space tonight, and there were only 6 people. So give you guys a big kudos to you had more than double of what they had, and that was earlier in the evening. But I always thought, like I said, I get out my hat and I think if money was not an option, I always hear there are infinite people up here with money and deep pockets that love Door County, and what can we do and how can we invest? And, buying houses, I drive by in the wintertime. In the summer, in the winter, you can see snow piled up. In the summer, you can see long lawn. And, what are these empty vacant houses? What are they being used for? It could be family that's out of the area, somebody died, left the home, nobody knows, looking into some of those things. Again, I don't have the answers, but I have some ideas and suggestions and who can I talk to. So I'm using you guys as my sounding board. Um, People don't necessarily want apartment living. A lot of them, they're going to say, yeah, you know what? If the furnace goes out, to Alexandra's defense, like now I have to worry about, paying for a furnace, or, my pipes burst, or I need new carpet. When you're living in an apartment, you don't have to do that. So there are a lot of people that prefer that. But a lot of people I talk to say, I want to own my own home. How do I get that? I'll tell you what, when I was young, I started out, I bought a trailer, and I lived in a mobile home park for 18 years. That really, truly afforded me the option to save money while having a little tiny equity in something that depreciates. But at the end of it, I walked away with a little money in my pocket. I lived there for 18 years, still had money. So I look at the trailer park and I drive through these trailer parks, and it's now what, $700, $800, $900 a month to rent the lot, which I know seems astronomical for the landowner, the owner of the park. But what would it be to get a bunch of investors, say through the community foundation, through WIDA?
Oh,
We lost you.
Nikki,
Anything, buy up, like,
you're back.
Sorry.
You started to cut out a little bit there, but I think, yeah, you brought up a whole bunch of things. There may be there was one person in Southern Door a handful of years ago that made a list of all the houses that were vacant in their town that they had thought somebody should be able to do something with. I mean, if money were no obstacle, I'd fund the heck out of all of the housing entities that we already have in this county. Because I mean, if the housing partnership could be, for example, buying up homes that are maybe not being used and rehab them and then turn around and sell them under the community land trust model, that'd be fabulous. But we don't have, millions of dollars sitting around, because even if the house looks like it's not being taken care of, whoever owns it may actually want enough money for it that it's not really affordable.
Right.
But yeah, and the manufactured home park idea, that is something where NIMBY comes into play sometimes, I think, because I can't remember. Well, the last time I can remember that one got proposed, it ended up getting shot down because the neighbors didn't want it. Yeah,
I'm not even saying, I'm saying, like, could we buy out the current owner with investors that all like-minded people to say, hey, let's all share in this so our neighbors and our friends can own a little piece of heaven like the rest of us maybe do.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think yeah, I mean, maybe municipalities and the business community and whatever other could try and band together to think of something like that. I know that, and I am not the person to talk to you about the finance end of things, but and you probably know this better than I do from living in a manufactured home park for so long, but the way you can't get WIDA mortgages for certain things, or for when you're not going to own the land. Well, no, that's not true. You can WIDA, actually, we have a couple of our community land trust buyers have been getting WIDA first time home buyer mortgages, but the rules are different, and as far as what they'll finance, and
and I think I was just throwing out just kind of anything, like the community foundation. There's a lot of money there. There's a lot of people that, it's already there. I'm not saying create something new. I'm saying let's invest. Let's have local investors instead of like some guy from out of town who's making buku bucks, so that these people can get to that next level where they could save a little money and eventually maybe have money to buy a house, a down payment, or some equity built up somewhere somehow. That Alice population will, I think, perpetually be in that Alice population. It's unfortunate. I think I got blacked out again. Oh, there it's
moving. It glitched a little.
Yeah, I don't know why it's doing that. I'm right in Sturgeon Bay.
Well, and maybe maybe we need to, because I've had this fantasy for a while that there needs to be a place or a person in Door County where all things housing related kind of go through. Not that they're going to be in charge of all of it, but they'll be like, oh, you need to talk to so-and-so. But where we try and collect all these ideas, because maybe we contact all the, I'm using the royal we.
Right.
We contact all the people that own manufactured housing parks in the county and say, hey, when or if you're ever thinking about selling, make sure you approach whatever this entity that doesn't exist yet is to talk about what we might do with it. Or, yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. It's just a smaller stepping stone. Like the Alice population, they can all afford this rent, but they can't afford they could afford a home because they're already paying it for rent and then some, but they can't even save enough money to try to buy a home someday. They're stuck. They're really literally stuck in someone else's fortune.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I found the building equity as a renter model so interesting.
Yeah, I like that. I hadn't heard that either. So
appetite to dig into that a little bit. Yeah, to have some kind of clearinghouse for ideas.
And I think, maybe the Door County Economic Development Corporation would be willing to take that on. They do a lot of, other than the committee, they are involved in a lot of conversations about housing and with a lot of businesses. So, Michelle, if you're listening, I just volunteered you.
I'll email Michelle. Thanks again for giving us this space.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for joining, Nikki.
I know we're a little over on, we had scheduled this for an hour, but I'm happy to go longer if anybody has any additional questions or comments or ideas. Speak
Mariah,
now.
this is a big can of worms that I don't know if it's possible to sort of succinctly summarize it, but do you want to touch a little bit on sort of what you've alluded to in terms of things that we're not allowed to do in Wisconsin?
Oh, well, actually, I think Emily did a great article about some of
She
those
did.
things. But for those of you that might not have read Emily's article, so in Wisconsin, you are no longer, as of maybe like 10 years ago, allowed to do what's called inclusionary zoning, which exists in other parts of the country and in Minnesota, our neighbors. And the concept behind that is when you're doing like a subdivision or a new apartment building, a municipality can put in their zoning code that a certain percentage of the units have to be affordable for the area median income. And you're not allowed to do that in Wisconsin. So that would be one tool that I think would be helpful to have. I don't think that short-term rentals are as big of a problem as some people do. I do think they are a problem, or they've become more of a problem. But Wisconsin, one of the problems in Wisconsin is that municipalities don't have very much that they can do in the way of regulating short-term rentals. Like, you're not allowed to ban them in certain areas. You can cap the number of days, but it gets complicated to figure out some of this stuff. And there's not much you can do to prevent them from kind of essentially taking over a neighborhood or a town. Like, I personally think there should be a cap that each municipality could set as like a percentage of their housing units. But what else would I like to do? I think some of the funding things that other states use, like Colorado and Massachusetts and Washington State, for how they fund some of their affordable housing initiatives, are not things that you're allowed to do in Wisconsin, whether it's an extra real estate transfer tax or and I know I'm sure realtors and people buying think that the real estate transfer tax is plenty high, but even a little bit seems like it could make a big impact to use for affordable housing. So yeah, I think those are just a couple. And Emily, maybe you remember more from what you wrote.
Yeah, if people haven't, like Mariah said, go read Emily's story on our website.
I
gets
forget
into that
everything I
directly.
write immediately.
Yeah.
I don't.
I do. Well, yeah, I have another one. For whatever reason, when you're doing a low-income housing tax credit project, and those are multifamily rental, affordable rental units, the building code requirements that they have to follow are stricter than if you were just building those apartments to be market rate apartments. And that makes, like, why are we making it more expensive to build these low-income housing tax credit projects? So I would change that if I were in charge of the state. Yeah, I'm sure I'll think of more as soon as we hang up.
Those are good. The inclusionary zoning is what came to mind right away for me. That one. I know it's not a blanket solution, and it has its downsides too, but I from what I understand, but I don't know. That seems like the one most obvious one. But as far as anything else, I think that covers it pretty well. Yeah, Nikki, you still have your hand up. Do you? Oh no, never mind. Okay. Well,
Anybody have any final questions or anything before we sign off?
And if anybody has any follow-up questions for me, if you want to email Door County Knock and then they can forward whatever it is to me, I'd be happy to talk to you further.
definitely. And I appreciate I've gotten lots of feedback from the community and from readers. I get at least once a week I have a link to some story about housing or study or something that's going on in another part of the country from somebody shares with me, which is great. I can't pay attention to all of it, and um, this is a topic that we could write about, and we will continue to write about. Maybe not as a formal series, but we'll continue covering it, and as things happen, pay more attention to those. The manufactured home park, though, thoughts about that. There's some interesting things with manufactured home parks and mobile home parks, the differences between the possibilities, some of the problems. That's something that I have been wanting to, that I have been sort of following and wanting to look at, and hopefully upcoming we'll do a story about that.
Great.
But otherwise, I guess, thank you, Mariah.
Yeah,
you
thank you for
much.
having me. Hope it was
And
helpful.
yeah, it was. And thank you for everyone who did come. This is for our first Zoom Q&A or discussion. I'm really pleased, and we will keep your eye out because we want to do this more.
Yeah, and any questions or follow-ups or feedback on this or anything else, email news@doorcountynock.org. It, for some reason, won't let me type that into a chat anywhere, but news@doorcountynock.org is our general email, and you can reach any of us through there. So, and if you have a question for Maya, feel free, like she said, to email us, and we can pass it on too. So.
Yep. All right.
Yeah, thanks so much to everybody for joining. Like Emily said, thank you, Mariah, for all your
Thanks.
time and
Yep.
expertise.
You're
And thanks, Emily.
Yep. Thank you.
All right.
Have a good night.
Yep.
Good night. Thanks.